As Bill rolled away the controller held high, he saw me standing there in the doorway. His smile disappeared like a light switch had been flipped off. He stopped immediately and got up from the floor, telling the kids that the game was over. They didn't stop right away, not knowing I was there. Bill grabbed both of them by the shoulder and turned them so they could see me standing there. I was still grinning at them, but I suddenly noticed that I was the only one still smiling. All the joy and laughter was gone. The silence following the laughter, deafening. Suddenly I felt it all come crashing down on me. The pain, the lack of joy in our house with Bill gone, the sadness I felt every night when I went to bed alone. All of it came crashing down, almost driving me to my knees. I was just standing there, not able to say anything when Bill spoke. "Okay, kids, it's time for me to go. I'll pick you up right at 10 tomorrow morning. Be ready, okay?" With that, he spoke to Rachel and then walked past me and out the door without a word. I watched him go with mixed emotions. He wasn't supposed to be here without notifying me, but then I realized I had told him I would be out this evening. He probably didn't expect to find me home so early. "Thanks a lot, Mom. You weren't supposed to be here this early. Dad and us were having a lot of fun together until you ruined it. Thanks a lot." That was from Jace as he angrily picked up the controller and turned the game off. He said goodnight to Rachel and then, followed by Jenny, walked out and up the stairs to their rooms. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Striddle. Mr. Striddle called to ask if you had gone out, and when I told him you had left, he came over to play with the twins. It was okay, wasn't it? You just told me he wasn't supposed to be here when you were. I'm sorry if I did something wrong. I didn't mean to." Rachel was concerned, her appearance looking as if she was afraid she had messed up.
No, no, Rachel.
"You did nothing wrong. And you're right. He isn't supposed to be here when I am, but you couldn't know I was coming home so early, and neither could he. So, it's all right. It's fine. You can go home now." I paid her and walked her to the door. "Thanks, Rachel. I'll call when I need you again. Good night." I stood there in the hallway of my home, alone as it seemed I was more and more. My children were angry with me. My babysitter was afraid she had done something wrong, and my ex-husband had walked out without a word to me. The joy and the laughter I saw when I first came in was missing from our home now, and had been since I confronted Bill with his infidelity. But what bothered me the most was that while he was the one that created the problem, I was the one paying the price. And it was a steep price to pay. I slowly walked up the stairs to my empty bed and stripped out of my new dress. I washed my face of the makeup I had applied so carefully and let my hair down. The elaborate hairdo I began the evening with forgotten. All of that care for what? A date with a man who wanted nothing more than to get into for some satisfaction? For him, of course, not for me. I sighed, turned out the light, and pulled the covers over me. The last thoughts I had before I fell asleep were about the laughter I saw earlier. I was sitting at the kitchen table the next morning, a Saturday, when the doorbell rang and the kids went to get it. It was Bill, coming to pick up the kids. As usual, he would wait outside for them to get their bags for the weekend stay over. I normally remained in the kitchen during this transition, but today, I felt the urge to see Bill. I wanted to see him relaxed and ready for 2 days with our twins. Without thinking of the consequences, I rose and walked into the foyer. I went to the door, opened the storm door, and saw him sitting on the steps. I spoke as he turned. "Good morning, Bill. How have you been?" He said nothing, just looked up at me. I was surprised at how well he looked. Unlike me, the divorce hadn't seemed to bother him much. But then he was probably screwing his little s regularly, and it seemed to be good for him. He stood then, turned around and looked away. "I've been doing okay. Work's good, business is up. So things are good. You?"
I'm ok, I guess.
"I'm sorry about last night. I should have called to let Rachel know I was coming home early. It wasn't your fault. Or Rachel's."
Yeah, okay.
"I was just spending a little time with the kids since I was at loose ends. I'll be more careful in the future. Please, Bill. It wasn't a problem. You don't have to do anything different. It was my mistake. The date first, and then not calling." As I was about to explain about the date, the twins came running out the door and grabbing their dad, ran to the car. Bill went with them as if my words were unimportant. As I watched them together, I realized that they probably were. They turned to wave goodbye as I watched them get in. They seemed so happy with him, more so than with me. I didn't seem to be able to get them to have fun anymore. I wish I knew why. I went back in, dreading the weekend without my kids. They were my only salvation now. Where I used to love the weekends, Bill and I sleeping late and listening to the kids downstairs on their PlayStation or watching cartoons, or just having fun, now it was just me. If they weren't with Bill for his weekend, they were gone to practice for something or other. This weekend was typical. With Bill gone, Brad gone, and now Jace and Ginny with their dad, it was just me, the day promising to be very empty. I spent the remainder of that day reflecting on my life. I was alone now, only my kids to keep me company. I worked at a job I didn't particularly like. I slept alone. I only dated occasionally since most of the guys I met were usually married or not candidates for other than one-night stands. I managed to survive the 2 days and on Sunday, fixed a small dinner, knowing the kids would be home but that Bill would probably feed them before coming back. He usually did that, taking the time to talk to them and make plans for the next weekend they would spend together. They always came home filled with plans and excited about the next time with their dad. I admit to being jealous. When the kids came home, they talked a little about their weekend but didn't give me any details. More and more, they seemed to consider their time with Bill as their time, not mine. I seemed to find myself more and more closed off from them. I made sure they were ready for school the following day and sent them off to bed. Bored, I soon followed and laid out my clothes for tomorrow, ready for my job. I worked at the bank until 2:30, 5 days a week with Saturday and Sunday off, and I had just gotten home that Monday when I heard the phone ringing. I used my key to open the door and rushing in, I dropped my stuff, ran into the kitchen to grab the phone before the caller hung up. Hello? This is Wendy. Is this Mrs. Striddle? Mrs. William Striddle? I didn't recognize the voice at all.
I'm Wendy Striddle.
I'm divorced now, so it's no longer Mrs. William Striddle. Can I help you? Yeah, maybe you can. Look, this is Harold Pierce, down at Capital Investigations. Bradley hired me to make up that report. You know, the one that you used to dump your old man? Looks like it worked okay since you're split now. I'm sorry, but I don't know much about you or the report. Only what Brad told me. Why are you calling me? Look, lady, it's too bad he had to bite the dust, but Brad still owed me $1,000 for making up that. Doctoring those pictures alone cost me a couple $100. Now that you're out from under that creep of a husband of yours, someone has to pay me the $1,000. Since he died, you're the only one left. I don't know what you're talking about. Brad said he paid for that report out of his own pocket. And what do you mean, doctoring those pictures? Why did you have to do anything to them? Don't be funny with me, lady. That report was bogus, and you know it. Those pictures were photoshopped by one of my guys, so don't give me any of that crap. I want my $1,000 or the DA will hear about your scam from an anonymous source. I'm covered so nothing comes back to me. But you? That's a different story. You wanted to dump that cheap SOB and get half of his money, so you had your lover hire me. I have his words on tape, telling me that the two of you planned this. So, I'll stop by tomorrow around noon for the $1,000. Have it waiting if you know what's good for you. He disconnected and I sat there, the phone still against my ear as the dial tone hummed. I was stunned. The report was bogus? The pictures were not real? It was all a scam and Brad was the one that did it all. He conned me all right. He made up that whole thing about Bill having an affair and got a sleazy PI to make up a false report, complete with pictures to convince me. And the worst part was that I fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker. I turned on my husband and refused to even consider that he was telling me the truth. I put down the phone and sat there, my head spinning, my stomach clenching in severe pain, my face flushed. I was feeling sick to my stomach and almost didn't make it to the bathroom before everything I had came up, scalding my throat and mouth as it spewed out. I know I screamed in agony as the truth came crashing down on me. All I could say was "no," over and over and over. I tried to get up, away from the commode, but when I stood, my stomach clenched again, the pain forcing me to my knees just in time for another round of heaves, mostly dry since the contents of my stomach were already in the bowl. I bent over, the cramps not letting go, my face drenched with sweat and my fists clenched in agony as I tried to bring up whatever was left. Each time I tried to get up, to wash my mouth of the sick taste, it hit me all over again. My kids found me there on the floor of the bathroom when they came home from school. I had been there for the past 2 hours, alternately seized by dry heaves and washing my face, then crying until the next spasm took control. My stomach was empty now, and the only thing left were the painful cramps that wouldn't stop. I felt like I wanted to die and hoped that I would. They did the only thing they could think of when they called Bill and told him I was very sick. I wanted to die now for sure. With Jace's help, I got up and half walked, half crawled up the stairs to the bedroom. I wanted to just lie down on the bed and let sleep claim me, but Jace got a wet washcloth and bathed my pale, ashen face. He looked so worried, and that made me try to take some control of myself. I couldn't let my child suffer for my sins. I had to ease his mind. Thanks, Jace. I'll be okay now. Please, go call your dad and tell him not to come. I don't want to see him now. Please, Jace. Please, go. But Mom, you're sick. You need someone to help you, and Jenny and I don't know what to do. Dad will know. He'll take care of you.
No, yes.
Listen to me now. I don't want your dad here. Do you hear me? Not your dad. Now, do as I told you. Call him. Tell him not to come.
No.
Wait. Better yet, let him come and then you and your sister go with him and stay there until I call you. Now, go. I got myself up, pushed my son out the door in spite of his yelling, and locked it behind him. I couldn't stand the thought of facing any of them right now. Maybe never again. I was humiliated, and the emotional pain was so intense I was making myself physically sick. I couldn't let Bill or my kids see that. I couldn't. I sank down on the bed, my stomach quiet for the moment. I wiped the back of my hand across my mouth, tasting the sour bite of vomit. I bowed my head, let the tears come, and I cried. I couldn't stop myself. What I had done to my family by believing Brad's story of Bill's infidelity was clear. Now I knew it for what it was. A fabrication built up with fake pictures and a fake report about some woman who didn't even exist. And I swallowed it. All of it. In spite of living with my husband for almost 15 years, I never even thought to question the story Brad brought me. And the warning Bill gave me about Brad so long ago. I just ignored that as well. I bought everything he told me, at the cost of my marriage and my family. As I sat there, I heard the sound of voices coming from downstairs. I waited, praying that they would all go and leave me here alone. I couldn't stand to face anyone tonight. I definitely couldn't face Bill. But then, Bill never wanted to look at me now anyway. He hadn't for some time. And now, knowing what I did, I couldn't blame him. He must hate me, and I now knew why he always looked at me with those accusing eyes. Pounding on the door. Wendy, let me in. Open the door, Wendy. Wendy. It was Bill, trying to get me to open the door. I couldn't. I just couldn't do that. I had to make him go away.
I'm fine, Bill.
Just take the kids and go. You can keep them for a few days. I'll call you tomorrow. Please, Bill, just go away. Wendy? Jace said you were sick. He and Jenny said you were very sick. Let me in, Wendy. You're scaring the kids now. Please, let me in. I couldn't do that to my kids. I had to do something. I sat up, wiped my face with the wet washcloth Jace had given me, and walked slowly to the door. If I could just make it through the next few minutes, Bill would take the twins and go. I would be alone.
Fine.
Just a minute. I squared my shoulders, took a deep breath, brushed my hair back from my face, and opened the door.
Ok, Bill.
Are you satisfied now?
I'm fine.
Now, please, just take Jace and Jenny and go back to your place for a couple of days. I'll be fine if you just give me a couple of days. Please. Bill stood there staring at me as if I was a complete stranger. I held his eyes for a few seconds before looking away, trying to find my children. They were standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking very small and frightened. I couldn't stand that, so I walked out of the room and over to the top of the stairs. Honest kids, I'm fine. I must have a bug or something, and I just don't want you two to catch it from me. So, if you stay with your dad, you should be safe. I can take care of myself. So, are we okay? I waited until I saw them nod, then turned back to Bill and said very softly, Please, Bill, just take them and go. I have to be alone right now. If you ever cared for me, please, just do this for me. Please, Bill. Bill looked at me and reached out to take my hand in his. Wendy, you are in some kind of trouble. Let me help. You are still the mother of my children. Let me help you for them, if not for yourself. I looked into his eyes, saw that small kernel of concern, and that was all I could stand. I began to cry as I ran into the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. I twisted the pathetic lock and stood there, my back pressed against the door as if to block him from coming in. I waited, but he didn't make further attempts. He walked away. I heard voices again, and then the door closed when they left. I stayed as I was until I heard the car pull out and, opening the door slowly, I listened to the silence. They were gone. That night was hell for me as I finally understood everything. I spent the next several days at work, doing the mindless job that I was beginning to hate, then returning home to sit and stare at the wall, trying to understand how I had been so gullible, so willing to believe something so horrible about the only man I had ever loved. And yes, now that I was forced to see the truth, I realized that I had loved him all along. That's why the thing with Brad never really felt good. Why my sadness over his death had passed so quickly. Why the dates with men I thought were fine always left me with an empty feeling. That's why James left in a huff on our date. I was comparing him to Bill, and he wasn't Bill. None of them were. Even Brad. Why hadn't I understood that before now? I paid the man his $1,000 on Tuesday and asked him for the truth. He told me what Brad had requested of him, that the girl was just some hooker they picked up off the street, the backgrounds lifted from the internet, and the report was just a complete fabrication, using dates and places supplied by Brad. He had a photographer take some pictures of Bill without his knowledge and used his face with the pictures of another man with the hooker. Since Brad knew Bill's schedule, he was the perfect one to set it up. And he did it all just to take me away from Bill, to best Bill at something, because of his jealousy. He knew Bill was to be promoted very soon, and he would end up working for him. So he wanted to take me away first. And he succeeded. I let him make a fool out of me and cheat Bill out of my love. And if he hadn't died in that freak car accident, I never would have known. It was Thursday before I called Bill to tell him he could bring the children home, but I requested that he stop and see me beforehand. I told him I had something I wanted to talk to him about, and that the children couldn't be a part of. He was curious, but all I would say was that it would be something he needed to know. He agreed finally, but reluctantly. I had debated about what I should do, and I knew one thing. I had to tell Bill the truth about everything. He had to know that I believed him and that I knew he had never cheated on me. It was important for me to let him know that I had regained my trust in him and recognized the decency that made him the man he was. While I couldn't take those things away from him, I could let him know that I now realized I should never have doubted him. He deserved that for me at least. Friday, Bill called and asked if we could meet at home that evening. He said we could talk. I could say what I wanted, and then we could decide if the kids should stay with him over the weekend. He was very quiet, not the least bit rude or abrupt as he normally was when he called. I appreciated that small token and agreed to meet him. He said he would bring takeout, something we used to do quite often. I thanked him and hung up, determined but frightened of what I was about to do. I finished my shift at the bank and left for home and my coming humiliation. Bill arrived right at 6, the time we had agreed to. He had a pizza and some Diet Pepsis that he sat on the kitchen table. I got the napkins and a couple of glasses and set 2 places, very domestic and very family-oriented. The hypocrisy was not lost on me. This artificial domesticity and my intended confession of unmitigated deceit and betrayal. I almost lost my courage, but I steeled myself and indicated to Bill that he should sit. I set the pizza on our plates, opened and poured the Pepsi. After that, I sat back and looked at Bill. I have something very difficult to say to you, and I need a promise from you that you will listen until I'm finished. If you try to interrupt or to ask questions before I'm done, I won't be able to get through this. This is important, Bill, so you have to promise me. Bill looked at me, and I guess the pain on my face convinced him that I needed to do this. He finally nodded and gestured for me to begin. I swallowed, said a quick prayer for help, and began. First, I want to apologize to you for not believing in you when you tried to tell me you would never do the things I accused you of. That was my biggest sin, and one I will regret until the day I die. All you asked of me was faith and trust, and I gave you neither. Bill started to say something, and I quickly raised my hand. Please, Bill, you promised. He subsided, and I continued. Before filing for the divorce, I let Brad convince me to bar you from seeing the children and living here in the house. I now know he did that to prevent you from talking to me and trying to convince me you didn't do those things. My sin is that I listened to him and not to you. When Brad moved in with me, To sleep in the bed you and I shared for all those years. I was so angry that I permitted it. We spent the weekends together when you had the kids. I was humiliated and ashamed when you spoke to me that day. Jay saw me with Brad and I realized what I was doing was wrong. The shame was only made worse when Brad decided to use a motel room instead, but I continued to meet him. That was when I lost the dignity that I had tried so hard to maintain when I thought you had betrayed me for another woman. To make it so much worse, Brad was a terrible lover, and all I could do was compare him to you. For your information, and because I owe you the truth, he was awful and I never enjoyed it. Why I continued I don't understand. I guess I was lonely and felt betrayed. I think now it was only a foolish way for me to try to get some revenge. I pushed the plate of pizza away from me, the smell almost causing my nausea to return. I had to continue this, do it once and for all. Make it through before my courage failed me. It was just last weekend when you had the kids that I got a phone call from Harold Pierce, the man at Capital Investigations. You remember them. The PI report that documented your betrayal of us? The report that produced those dramatic pictures of you and that woman? The report that convinced the judge that your claims were just nonsense? Do you remember that report? I was almost yelling now, the pain and the anger gripping me again, just as it had when he called. My throat closed up and I could hardly speak. I was so furious at the injustice of what I learned. Bill stood and reached for me, but I angrily waved him back.
No.
I have to do this. I have to. I took a deep breath, held it, and then exhaled noisily. I continued. It was all a sham, a pack of lies. Brad paid him to create those pictures and to doctor the report and make it look authentic. Brad paid him. Brad did it all just to take me away from you. And he succeeded. He succeeded because I failed to trust you. Don't you see? It was all my fault. I destroyed our marriage by my failure to believe in you. The foolish man called me to ask for an additional $1,000 that Brad owed him. Brad told him that he and I were in agreement to fake the report and the pictures. He had a tape of Brad making the request to fabricate the report, and he claimed that I was aware and in agreement. It was nothing but a con that Brad used to take me away. Just a lie. It was all a damned lie, and I found out because Brad was killed that day in that stupid car accident. I now thank God that he was. The day I learned all of this was the day the children called you, because I was so sick. I was sick at heart, but the pain was enough to bring me down. That's why I had you leave so quickly. I couldn't stand to face you, and I couldn't stand for you to look at me, knowing I had failed you and betrayed you in my anger. I did it. I made it all the way through. I had given Bill the truth so that he could know that I believed him now, that I knew without doubt that he had never betrayed me. But it was also true that he knew how I betrayed him. It was all over now. Bill could go on with our children knowing that he had my trust, but now he knew that I had Brad repeatedly while we were separated. I had betrayed my marriage vows to Bill long before our marriage was terminated. We were separated but not divorced. I had betrayed him, and now I knew I didn't even have the justification of revenge. I was exhausted. The truth and the emotional toll it demanded of me to tell Bill took more from me than I expected. I was drenched with sweat, my face pale and my hands shaking with emotion. I reached for the forgotten Pepsi to quench my parched throat. So, now you know it all. That Brad betrayed both of us, and that you never failed me while I did fail you. It was so easy for him, and I was so ready to accept the lie. What does that say about me? I don't want to think about it. Just know that I never stopped loving you, even when I was convinced that you had cheated on me. I never stopped, Bill. I never stopped. I stood, looked at Bill, who was sitting there, quiet now. He seemed to be deep in thought. I decided to take this reprieve to say, please keep the twins until Sunday evening as usual. I can't see them right now.
I'm sorry, Bill.
I'm so very, very sorry for all I put you through. I hope someday you'll be able to forgive me. Good night. I turned and ran up the stairs to the bedroom where I seemed to be spending more and more of my time lately. I heard Bill call through the door that he was leaving, but I didn't respond. I wanted to be by myself. It was only now that I realized that I had destroyed all the good things in my life. I had been a fool, a gullible fool, to allow Brad to lead me by the nose as he did, and I deserved what I got now. I deserved nothing less. Bill brought the twins home that Sunday evening at the proper time, and I had a light dinner waiting. He came in with them, just to be sure I was okay. I smiled at him, but didn't stay to talk. I walked back into the kitchen, Bill standing there in the foyer watching me until I was out of sight. He left, calling a good night to the twins as he left. 2 weeks passed in which I worked very hard to get the twins to talk to me, to tell me what they were doing and how they were getting along. It seemed that it had been forever since I just talked to them and took a real interest in what they were doing. Up till then, I was feeling sorry for myself, put upon by the death of my lover, the destruction of my marriage, and anything else I could feel some self-pity about. Now, I was determined to make myself get back into the world of the living. My kids came first. I was discussing something with them when they reminded me that Bill was coming to pick them up that Saturday morning. I had almost forgotten until then, and the thought of Bill brought a wave of pain. Pain for all I had lost. I fought it back and told them that was fine and that I would be sure they had all they needed. Jace wanted his favorite shirt clean, and Ginny wanted a change of shorts for the park. I promised that both would be ready. They seemed pleased that I was taking an interest again, and we talked about what they were going to do. Apparently, Bill had promised them a trip to the planetarium to see a new diorama that was just being introduced. It sounded wonderful, and I told them so. I envied them this time with their dad. I had them ready, their small bags packed with their special requests, and made sure they each had last-minute instructions on how to behave. I knew it was not necessary as they always behaved for their father, but it gave me some sense of normalcy. And they seemed to like it as they smiled and fidgeted good-naturedly while assuring me they would behave. I was pleased at the ease with which we were now getting along. It seemed that when I bared my soul to Bill and told him what I did, I regained some of my own pride and self-respect. It wasn't easy, but it was very worthwhile. I felt a huge sense of relief and pleasure which seemed to be apparent to my children. At least they were responding to me now, where before there was more resentment. I waited with them until Bill's car pulled into our driveway. I opened the door and watched them run to the car where Bill stood waiting. He got them inside, made sure they were buckled up, and then, surprising me as well as the twins, he walked up the driveway toward me. I waited, wondering what he wanted to say. I had no expectations, but I was curious. I felt maybe we had entered a new phase in our relationship, possible friends, but I suspected even that was too much to hope for. "Good morning, Wendy. Are you feeling better now? I know it was very hard for you, what you said to me that day. I just wanted to let you know that I realized that and to say thank you for doing it. I'm a lot better now. It was very hard, but it was more painful to realize what I did and the harm it caused for all of us. But it's given me a great sense of peace now that you know that I know the truth. Thank you for that." Bill turned and started down the drive. Then he stopped. I watched, curious as to what he had forgotten. Something else he wanted to say? He turned, walked back to the bottom of the stairs, and looked up at me. I waited, feeling the pleasant twinge in my stomach that I always felt when Bill looked at me that way. I could only wish it was the way he felt about me again, but that was too much to ask for. He opened his mouth once, shut it, swallowed, then spoke. "Would you like to join us today? We're going to the planetarium, and I know the twins would really like it if you came." All I could do was sob, the tears welling up in my eyes and my throat closing with emotion. I swallowed, wiped my eyes, and replied, "I would love to." It's been almost a year since Bill invited me to join him and our twins for his weekends with them. It's not always that he does it, but often enough that I was beginning to hope for more. I know I don't deserve it, but I can still hope that he can come to forgive me. We spoke about it at length once, and Bill was very kind to me. He understood why I was so convinced when he saw the pictures and read the report. He knew that both were fakes, but there was no way to convince me at that time since I thought they were real. And we now knew that Brad was the worst kind of predator, taking advantage of every possibility. He was driven by jealousy and envy. The problem was that while intellectually, Bill could understand my suspicions, his heart wasn't as forgiving. He said only that he was sorry I couldn't trust him more, especially when he told me that he was innocent. I've done all I could to make him understand that even though I thought he was unfaithful to me, I never stopped loving him. I let him know that my time with Brad was not wonderful, that the thing with him was always unsatisfactory, and that I continued to always compare him with Bill, and that Brad always came off second best. In every way. As to dating, it was hopeless for me since I continued to compare them all to Bill. He hears me, he listens very intently, but he just shakes his head. I don't know what that means. The one thing he did say during that talk was that if I still loved him as I said, Why didn't I give our marriage another chance? Why couldn't I find it within my heart to forgive him for what I thought he did? I had no answer to that, and that bothered me a lot. I finally concluded that Brad was manipulating me into not letting Bill back in my life. Bill agreed, but still wondered why I was so eager to push him away. I never asked Bill about his time away from me and the twins. During the week when we both worked, there was no communication. We hadn't come to the point where we could pick up the phone and just chat as friends. We weren't real friends. We were a divorced couple who shared custody of their children, and that was still our situation, even now. I tried in every way I knew to let Bill know that I was sorry and that, if given the chance, I would do all I could to repair the damage I did to our marriage. He seems to understand that, and he sometimes says things that lead me to think that maybe, oh well, just maybe. Things finally came to a conclusion one Sunday after Bill had returned with the twins from a day when he didn't ask me to join them. It was a long weekend for me, wondering what they were doing and why they didn't ask me to join them. I told myself that it was nothing, just Bill wanting to spend some quality time alone with them. I convinced myself of that by the time they came home. Bill stayed outside and soon left without saying goodbye or coming in to chat. I noticed that he was doing that more and more. I spoke to Jace and Jenny that evening and casually asked them what they did that day. We were on good terms again, and we did often talk about their time with Bill. This time I caught the look that passed between Jace and Jenny before Jenny spoke. "Mom, we talked it over between us and we have to say something. We promised Dad that we wouldn't, but we don't think that's fair to you 'cause we love both of you the same." She looked once more at her brother before continuing. "Dad has a girlfriend. Her name is Cindy and she's very nice. She has a daughter, Judy, who is our age, and the five of us have been spending a lot of weekends together." Jenny looked at Jace and he nodded. He picked up where Jenny stopped. I had stopped breathing, dreading what was coming. This weekend was a lot of fun. We went to a cabin at Lake Pontiac and spent the whole weekend there with Cindy and Judy. We think Dad and Cindy were together at night, but we aren't sure. They didn't say anything about it. At this, Jace seemed to be embarrassed, but he swallowed and continued. I held my breath because I knew what was coming. I steeled myself, gripping my hands so tightly that my fingernails were digging into my palm. My throat was already tight and my eyes were beginning to blur with the tears that I just barely held back. But Dad did talk to Jenny and me and told us he wanted to ask Cindy to marry him. He wanted our opinion of that and to be sure how we felt about her. He said he would talk to you about it before he asked her. There. It was done. It was over now, once and for all. My hopes and my prayers weren't answered. Even from the grave, Brad won. He destroyed Bill's love for me and left me behind with nothing but the ashes of 15 years. He must be laughing now. He must think that he had accomplished his purpose. But the joke was on him. Bill was happy again. He had found someone else to replace me, someone who would believe in him. After all, wasn't I the one that refused to believe that he might be telling the truth? And as I thought about it, I realized that I was the only one that lost. Brad destroyed me and my marriage, but not the man he hated and envied. Brad lost his life without knowing he had failed. How ironic. I lost everything, and the pain of my choice to believe Brad over Bill was mine to bear. The price for my betrayal and my lack of trust in my husband and my marriage was due in full. All I could do now was pay that price.